What do you remember about that first day?
Oh, how terrified I was. Um, and that I actually thought that the soldiers who were there were going to protect all students. That's why I made 3 different attempts to enter the school grounds. I thought, well, I'm not supposed to enter here. That's why they're turning me away. They crossed rifles at one point, and then they um, joined shoulder to shoulder to bar me. And at the last attempt, the third attempt, the soldier directed me across the street where those angry demonstrators were. And that's when it finally dawned on me that they weren't there they were there to keep me out of school.
The first attempt we made, we were not allowed to enter the school grounds or the school itself. Later, we made an attempt to enter the school under the protection of the Little Rock police, which turned out to be one of the most dangerous days of that whole year, because the mob did break through the lines and they were coming in to kill all of us. There was actually some talk.
You said they were coming in to kill all of us?
Yes, that was the plan. There was actually some talk among the Little Rock police, who were that day protecting us, sort of protecting us, whether or not they would allow the mob to hang one of us and save 8. But then a voice of reason from the assistant police chief, a man by the name of Gene Smith, persuaded them to rescue all 9 of us. And because there was an underground garage in that school, it was possible. Absent that garage, I don't know what may have happened. We may not have been able to be here talking to you today, but we were spirited out of there. The drivers were instructed to get us out using any means necessary, using only the accelerator, don't even think about using the brake, because the mob was that insistent. That was the second time. The third time, we actually got in, but this time we had the 101st Airborne Division escorting us into the school. So each of those 3 times, there are different stories involved. On that first time, I, like Elizabeth, was frightened immediately because of the nature of the crowd, and their voices were so loud and very directed toward us with their plans, which again involved hanging, another form of killing. So every single day after that was the same, basically, in terms of the threat against our lives.
What was being shouted or hurled at you that day?
Oh my! I never repeat the language, because all Americans know what the language is. Um, but one thing that was most terrifying when somebody said, "Get a rope, let's hang her," and the people were behind me as I was walking, and when I got to the bus stop, they almost surrounded me.
Did you change rooms for your classes?
Yes, we had a class schedule, different classes, 4 or 5, as I recall. The soldiers were allowed to escort us from class to class. They did not have permission to enter the classroom. In fact, they could not enter any of the rooms we entered. The cafeteria, the auditorium, the gym, bathrooms, the library, the chapel, any place. We were on our own at that point. And we had
And what was that like when you were on your own?
Not very good, to put it mildly. No. Our attention had to be always on who was in our close environment and what they might do. We had to be on guard. And on those days when we failed to maintain vigilance, we suffered greatly. All of us, by the end of that year, wound up being pretty battered physically, emotionally, psychologically.
Has the horror of it ever left you? Have you been able?
It comes back in unexpected times. I tried to guard against it by not talking about some things, but it can be triggered by a sound. There's an immediate impact where I'm reliving the experience, and that cannot be avoided. But I've learned to accept that.
Congresswoman, what goes through your mind when you hear these stories?
I think more importantly than becoming a congresswoman, I think their stories and stories like that are what encouraged me to become a teacher, to become an educator. Because as I hear these stories, I often think of the parents. You know, I'm a parent myself, and I'm not sure I could have let my child continue in that situation. So, You know, their families were strong to kind of see the forest through the trees and think it was important enough to just allow their children to have these experiences so that I would be able to have a better academic experience. Something that I often think of is, I remember having a conversation with the outgoing Secretary of Education, and she made a statement, I want to move government out the way so that parents can make decisions for their children. And my immediate response was, but isn't that our job to keep kids safe? And hearing them talk about once they were in the building and the adults there really did not protect them in the way that they should have, really makes it that much more important that we have people in positions of authority who think it's important enough that all kids matter, that all kids have value. And I think for Terrence, what he's saying really resonates with me, because I've had so many young men, high school age young men, who their appearance makes them look a lot older than they actually are. And I recognize, and what I've tried to tell them is, their response really can have a negative impact on a situation. I can't imagine if Terrence had responded in a negative way. He probably wouldn't be here to talk to us today. And I think our young men have it that much worse when they're faced with these types of situations of discrimination and unfair treatment in our communities.
Was there equity in education when you were teaching?
We have a long way to go towards equity. I mean, even as a member of Congress, my district is home to some of the highest performing, most exclusive boarding schools in the world and some of the lowest performing schools in the country. I have some of the lowest income and some of the wealthiest people in the country live in my district. And the sad part is, in some of these districts, they're only 5-10 miles apart. My state, if you remember, put a parent in prison for sending her child to a neighboring district. These are the equity challenges. I remember my first year of teaching, I had to photocopy textbooks because I had 4 textbooks for a class of 29 students. And these are the types of investments that we have to make if we care about our children's education. And it cannot just be according to their zip. We always hear your education should not be determined by your zip code. But right now, the way that it is set up, it really is, because kids who live in the most affluent districts have access to more resources, to physical environments that are better, robust after-school programs, and community resources. And I think COVID, the period that we're in right now, has only illuminated those equity gaps.
Are we moving in the direction to narrow the gap between those who have a good education and those who do not?
I absolutely think we're moving towards that. And I am not so naive or so altruistic that I don't understand all of the challenges. But in my office, I have, a photograph of Barack Obama naming me as the National Teacher of the Year, side by side with a photograph of Ruby Bridges being escorted by federal marshals into a school. The fact that I could be named the National Teacher of the Year in the same country where this little girl had to be escorted by federal marshals, where the Little Rock Nine could not even imagine being treated equally, means that every single one of us is doing our part to chip away at these inequities little by little. And once I stop believing that we can make a difference, I think that the fight in me will be gone. But I think all of us, you have to believe that it's possible. You have to believe that your input and your contribution will make a difference.
Why did you want to be a part of this?
I wanted to do something to make change. I wanted something very different for myself and other people like me. So that was one of the reasons I said yes when the time came to volunteer to become one of this group of 9.
Do you think that your hopes have been realized all these years later?
No, my hopes go far beyond where we've come to this point. We've got so much more to do. We may get there. I don't think we'll get there in my lifetime.
The United States is approaching a reckoning, but until we fully acknowledge our painful but shared past, there will not be reconciliation.
Is there one thing you could identify on the legislative level that would help narrow the gap in these education inequities?
Oh my goodness, it'd be hard to identify one thing, but I guess making the investments in our most underserved communities, making sure the physical structures, the resources, the textbooks, making sure that we're diversifying the education profession, that our students are not over-identified as special education, or if they do require services, that those are being provided very early on. But also to make sure that those community-based services, things like housing and food security, are addressed, mental health services, so that kids come to school ready to learn. So we really have to put our kids in the best possible position and then give them access to every available opportunity, because it's possible for them to succeed.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.